The quiet but earnest manner in which this young creature prepared herself to perform the duty, the self-abandonment with which she forgot her sex's timidity and sex's shame, in order to sustain her parent at that trying moment, the loftiness of purpose with which she directed all her powers to the immense object before her, with a woman's devotion and a woman's superiority to trifles, when her affections make the appeal, and the holy calm into which her grief was compressed, rendered her for the moment an object of something very like awe and veneration to her companions. Mabel had been religiously educated, equally without exaggeration and without self-sufficiency. Her reliance on God was cheerful and full of hope, while it was of the humblest and most dependent nature. She had been accustomed from childhood to address herself to the Deity in prayer, taking example from the divine mandate of Christ himself, who commanded his followers to abstain from vain repetitions, and who has left behind him a petition which is unequalled for sublimity, as if expressly to rebuke the disposition of man to set up his own loose and random thoughts as the most acceptable sacrifice. The sect in which she had been reared has furnished to its followers some of the most beautiful compositions in the language, as a suitable vehicle for its devotion and solicitations. Accustomed to this mode of public and even private prayer, the mind of our heroine had naturally fallen into its train of lofty thought. Her task had become improved by its study, and her language elevated and enriched by its phrases. When she kneeled at the bedside of her father, the very reverence of her attitude and manner prepared the spectators for what was to come; and as her affectionate heart prompted her tongue, and memory came in aid of both, the petition and praises that she offered up were of a character which might have worthily led the spirits of angels. Although the words were not slavishly borrowed, the expressions partook of the simple dignity of the liturgy to which she had been accustomed, and was probably as worthy of the being to whom they were addressed as they could well be made by human powers. They produced their full impression on the hearers, for it is worthy of remark that, notwithstanding the pernicious effects of a false taste when long submitted to, real sublimity and beauty are so closely allied to nature that they generally find an echo in every heart. But when our heroine came to touch upon the situation of the dying man, she became the most truly persuasive, for then she was the most truly zealous and natural. The beauty of the language was preserved, but it was sustained by the simple power of love, and her words were warmed by a holy zeal, that approached to the grandeur of true eloquence. We might record some of her expressions, but doubt the propriety of subjecting such sacred themes to a too familiar analysis, and refrain. The effect of this singular but solemn scene was different on the different individuals present. Dunham himself was soon lost in the subject of the prayer, and he felt some such relief as one who finds himself staggering on the edge of a precipice, under a burden difficult to be borne, might be supposed to experience when he unexpectedly feels the weight removed, in order to be placed on the shoulders of another better able to sustain it. Cap was surprised, as well as awed, though the effects on his mind were not very deep or very lasting. He wondered a little at his own sensations, and had his doubts whether they were so manly and heroic as they ought to be, but he was far too sensible of the influence of truth, humility, religious submission, and human dependency, to think of interposing with any of his crude objections. Jasper knelt opposite to Mabel, covered his face, and followed her words, with an earnest wish to aid her prayers with his own, though it may be questioned if his thoughts did not dwell quite as much on the soft, gentle accents of the petitioner as on the subject of her petition. The effect on Pathfinder was striking and visible, because he stood erect, also opposite to Mabel, and the workings of his countenance, as usual, betrayed the workings of the spirit within. He leaned on his rifle, and at moments the sinewy fingers grasped the barrel with a force that seemed to compress the weapon, while once or twice, as Mabel's language rose in intimate association with her thoughts, he lifted his eyes to the floor above him, as if he expected to find some visible evidence of the presence of the dread being to whom the words were addressed. Then again his feelings reverted to the fair creature who was thus pouring out her spirit, in fervent but calm petitions, in behalf of a dying parent. For Mabel's cheek was no longer pallid, but was flushed with a holy enthusiasm, while her blue eyes were upturned in the light, in a way to resemble a picture by Guido. At these moments all the honest and manly attachment of Pathfinder glowed in his ingenuous features, and his gaze at our heroine was such as the fondest parent might fasten on the child of his love. Sergeant Dunham laid his hand feebly on the head of Mabel as she ceased praying, and buried her face in his blanket. "Bless you, my beloved child, bless you," he rather whispered than uttered aloud. "This is truly consolation. Would that I too could pray." "Father, you know the Lord's Prayer. You taught it to me yourself while I was yet an infant." The sergeant's face gleamed with a smile, for he did remember to have discharged that portion at least of the paternal duty, and the consciousness of it gave him an inconceivable gratification at that solemn moment. He was then silent for several minutes, and all present believed that he was communing with God. "Mabel, my child," he at length uttered, in a voice which seemed to be reviving, "Mabel, I'm quitting you. The spirit at its great and final passage appears ever to consider the body as nothing. I'm quitting you, my child. Where is your hand?" "Here, dearest father, here are both. Oh, take both." "Pathfinder," added the sergeant, feeling on the opposite side of the bed, where Jasper still knelt, and getting one of the hands of the young man by mistake, "take it. I leave you as her father, as you and she may please. Bless you both." At that awful instant no one would rudely apprise the sergeant of his mistake, and he died a minute or two later, holding Jasper's and Mabel's hands covered by both his own. Our heroine was ignorant of the fact until an exclamation of Cap's announced the death of her father, when, raising her face, she saw the eyes of Jasper riveted on her own, and felt the warm pressure of his hand. But a single feeling was predominant at that instant, and Mabel withdrew to weep, scarcely conscious of what had occurred. The Pathfinder took the arm of Eau douce, and he left the block. The two friends walked in silence past the fire, along the glade, and nearly reached the opposite shore of the island in profound silence. Here they stopped, and Pathfinder spoke. "'Tis all over, Jasper," said he. "'Tis all over. Ah's me! Poor Sergeant Dunham has finished his march, and that too by the hand of a venomous Mingo. Well, we never know what is to happen, and his luck may be yourn or mine tomorrow or next day."
"And Mabel? What is to become of Mabel, Pathfinder?"
"You heard the Sergeant's dying words. He has left his child in my care, Jasper, and it is a most solemn trust. It is, yes, it is a most solemn trust."
"It's a trust, Pathfinder, of which any man would be glad to relieve you," returned the youth, with a bitter smile.
"I've often thought it has fallen into wrong hands. I'm not conceited, Jasper, I'm not conceited. I do think I'm not. But if Mabel Dunham is willing to overlook all my imperfections and ignorances like, I should be wrong to gainsay it, on account of any sartainty I may have myself about my own want of merit."
"No one will blame you, Pathfinder, for marrying Mabel Dunham, any more than they will blame you for wearing a precious jewel in your bosom that a friend has freely given you."
"Do you think they'll blame Mabel, lad? I've had my misgivings about that, too, for all persons may not be so disposed to look at me with the same eyes as you and the Sergeant's daughter." Jasper Eau douce started as a man flinches at